In this video, we actually show you a brief demo on how your program is supposed to behave for your assignments, which will implement a tic-tac-toe game. So, as we grade your submission, we are actually going to execute your program by launching your tic-tac-toe class. And the first thing you should do is to say enter a name for the X player. Remember, we got two players for the game. One be for X, the other one for O. Enter a name for the X player, and then I can say, for example, Jin. Hit enter, and enter the name for the O player. Let's say Jonathan here. And now you can see that your program already can customize the message here. Say who plays first, Jim or Jonathan. And Jim or Jonathan here corresponds to the Jim and Jonathan that you actually enter for your game. Of course, if you enter, for example, let's say Alan and Mark, then here it would say who plays first, Alan or Mark. So now here, who plays first, Jim or Jonathan? You should really enter either Jim or Jonathan here. So however, if you enter Peter here, and your program should say Peter is not a registered player, and then repeat. You should keep prompting the user to re-enter the names until they actually got someone who is already registered. So for example, if I say Jeremy, again, it's going to say Jeremy is not a registered player. Who plays first, Jim or Jonathan? So now if I say Jim here, so now that means Jim is going to play first for the tic-tac-toe game for the current turn. And they would say, okay, so now we're going to start a game, and your program must first print out what's the initial states for the game. And in the initial state of the game, you have 1, 2, 3, 3 slots in the first row, and also another 3 slots in the second row, and similarly another 3 slots in the third row. So you got 9 slots in total. And we use the dot here to represent a slot that has not been marked yet, like an available slot. And later on, a slot will be replaced by either an X or an O, depending on how the player would like to play. Okay, so now we'd say that since we actually entered Jim to say Jim would like to play first, so now you would say, now for the current turn, Jim is going to play first. And of course, in the next turn, Jonathan is going to play. And now after so your program must specify who is going to be the player for the current term, in this case, Jim. And also, your program must prompt the user first for a row number between 0 and 2. And let's say if I enter something that's not valid. And your program must say, well, the number you enter is not a valid row. So again, you should really reprompt. You should really keep prompting the user for a new row number until it is valid between 0 and 2. And now choose a row number here, and then let's say I choose 2, which is valid, and then choose a column number. After the row number is valid, you actually prompt the user for a column number. Now let's say I enter an invalid column number. In this case, you're actually going to restart the process from prompting the user to enter a row number rather than just a column number. So when I say -1, so you would say -1 is not a valid column. So now you see we're actually going to start over again by prompting the user right from the beginning to ask them to enter a row number. Okay, so let's say I would like the row number to be 2, and now for the column number I would say 0. Okay, so now both the row number and column numbers are valid. So now, because they are valid, and also the row number 2 and column number 0 is going to identify this slot here, and because the current turn is actually Jim, and Jim was actually specified to be a X player, so that is why now you actually put X, replace this slot here by X. Okay, so far so good. So now, now we are finished with the turn where Jim plays. So now we are actually going to the next turn. So your program must again. So in the beginning of this turn, first of all, your program must print out what's the latest states of your grid. In this case, because from the last turn, we actually Jim actually marked X in this slot here. That's why you have X here as the updates. And then you would say for the current turn, Jonathan is going to play. That's why you see this line. So your program must output the latest grid from the previous turn, and also it must output who is going to be the player for the current turn. And then again, you're going to say choose a row number here. So let's say if you choose to say, well, I would like to have row number 2, and then I would say column number 0. In this case, basically, Jonathan also wants to put an O in this place where X has already been placed. In this case, it will also be considered as an error. So let's see. So your program must say that slots at 20 is already occupied. So this is also considered as an error. So you remember, so far we got 3 possible errors for the row and column. Either when the row is actually not between 0 and 2, or if the column is not between 0 and 2, or both columns and rows are valid themselves, but the identified slot has already been occupied. Okay, so that's a third possible error. So now whenever we have this such an error here where the slots is already occupied, we're going to we actually have to prompt the user to re-enter the row and column number again until they actually got some valid column and valid row, and also they are not occupied, right? So now let's say we would like Jonathan to put, let's say in this slot over here, which would be 1 and 0. So let's say row number will be 1 and then column number will be 0. And after that, you can see again, your program must print out what's the latest updated states for the grid. So you can see Jonathan actually just put O in this slot here, and then this was actually done by Jim from the previous turn, previous turn. And now, because Jonathan is already done, so now it's now the turn for Jim, right? You can see Jonathan and Jim simply just alternate between their turns. And now the player of the current turn will be Jim. And let's go on. And let's say for Jim, let's say we are trying to do an example where Jim is going to win. So easily, let's say. And then choose a row number here. Let's say I would choose this slot here for Jim. And then that would be row number 2. And then column number 1. Okay, you can see also we place something here. And now for Jonathan, let's say I'll put O here. Okay, so it will be row number 1 and column number 1. Okay, now for Jim, I'm going to place an X here, which will make Jim win. In this case, I would say Jim is going to put row number 2 and then column number 2. In this case, so now, first of all, your program must output again what's the resulting states? What's the resulting state from the previous turn? So this would be after Jim's last updates in 2-2, and now you should have XXX in a row. So now your program must be able to decide that game is over and Jim wins. You must output this line correctly depending on who the winner is. And then now your program must prompt the user because the current game is over, because Jim actually wins the game. So you should ask the user, would you like to play again? And you should only expect Y for yes or N for no. Only these 2 possible answers. Let's say if I say yes, then your program must say, well, yes is not the valid answer because we're expecting only Y or N. So now you should really have the user to prompt the user to re-enter their answer until they got the right one. Let's say I also say Y, for example. That would not work either because it's case sensitive. Okay, so now let's say Y. So that'd be the correct answer. If you say that, so now you can see we are actually back to the very beginning. So if you recall, from the very beginning of the game, we actually have enter a name for the X player. And now we are simply just entering another new game. So let me just choose a different player. I can still choose Jim and Jonathan. Maybe you can choose another one. So how about Alan and Mark? Alan and Mark. Okay, who plays first? Let's say Mark plays first. Okay, and now I'm going to give you a run where we're going to reach a tie between the 2 players, which means no one actually wins the game. Okay, let's say Mark is going to put 0 and 0, and Alan would be to do 0 and 1. Okay, Mark would be 0 and 2. Okay, and now for Alan, it would be 1 and 0. Okay, Alan was the X player. Okay, remember? And then now for Mark, Mark is going to be the O player, and then Mark is going to put maybe 1 and 1. Okay, so now for Alan, Alan is going to be the X player, right? So now we're going to put maybe Alan maybe here. Okay, just make sure no one wins. Okay, Alan is going to be here. So now Alan would be 1 and 2. So now, Mark would be the O player. So let's say let's not put Mark here because if we put Mark here, then Mark will win actually. So now let's put Mark maybe in this slot over here. Okay, so now we're going to put Mark 2 and 1. 2 and 1. Okay, now for Alan, so now we'll make sure we put Alan in somewhere that he's not going to win. Okay, so how about we put Alan here? Okay, if we put Alan here, and actually, if we put Alan here, let's say, how about 2 and 2? 2 and 2. Okay, so now for Mark, actually Mark is going to win because if we put Mark here, then he'll win anyway. So this may not be a good example, but let's just do it anyway. So now if we put Mark here, then Mark will actually take the last available slots. Okay, and now we're gonna have 2 and 0. In this case, actually, Mark still wins. Let's try another one. Just I want to get a tie, actually. So now, would you like to play again? Let's say yes. Okay. So now, still, Alan and Tom. Alan and Tom. Let's say Alan will play first. Okay. Of course, this is typo here, so you can see AALN. It's not a registered player. So let's say Alan. Okay. So let's say we put Alan here. This time I'll be very careful. Okay, so 0 and 0. And then also for Tom, we're going to do, what about just 1 and 0. Okay, now for Alan, let's say 1, 0 and 1. Okay, and now Tom, I will put 0 and 2. Okay, so now for Alan, I will do let's say 2 and 0. Okay, now for Tom, I will do maybe 1 and 1. Okay, in this case, for Alan, I will put 1 and 2. Okay, so now let's say okay, so since we're okay, so now for Tom, I will go for 2 and 1. Okay, so now finally for Alan, let's say go for 2 and 2. Okay, so game is over. You can see we have taken. So you can see the final one, the final turn. The player was actually Alan, and Alan simply just took the last available slots from the previous turn, as you can see. And then after this, no one actually has won the game. So that's why we say game is over and it is a tie. Okay? So now would you like to play again? One thing for you to think about is whenever you have a tie, then the player for the last turn must be the player who started it first. Okay? You can see now we got a tie and Alan was the player for the last turn. And if you just go back to the very beginning, and when we ask the user who is going to play first, and we actually say Alan. So that's something for you to figure out why. It is always the case if the game turns out to be a tie, and the player of the last turn must be the player who played the first. That's something for you to think about why. Okay. So would you like to play again? Let's say we don't want to play again, so we'll simply say N here, and your program must say bye to the user. Okay, so this actually shows you actually many scenarios where you must think about for your program. So whenever, basically in principle, whenever the user enters any invalid answer or input, you must repeatedly prompt the user to re-enter their input until the input is actually valid. That's one thing. And also, you must make sure you also follow exactly the format for the messages that you see from this demo. So you're responsible for studying this demo very carefully and then to follow exactly the output formats in order to get full marks for your assignments. Okay, that'll be the end of the video, and I hope that will help you.